verse says, it shall end, or the end thereof shall be with the flood. And this idea of the flood comes from Revelation chapter 12 verse 15 and 16, which is papal Rome, and the time frame for that persecution was 538 to 1798. So the theme of this verse here, the bit that most people don't talk about, is dealing with punishment on Israel. And punishment on Israel continues into this time frame, because when you go to Revelation chapter 11 verse 2, it says Jerusalem shall be trodden down for 42 months, or the holy city, and we know that's a representation of the church in the wilderness. We know that literal Israel were the church, and spiritual Israel, or the church in the wilderness, is also the church. So that's the first part of the question, which is the second part of verse 26. And people are still writing, so let's go on to verse 27. It says, and he, Christ, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So it's talking about this 1 week after the 62 weeks. So you have the 62 weeks plus the 1 week. And it says in the midst of the week Christ will be cut off. And just the time frame from that is from AD 27 to AD 34, and it says in the midst of that, which is AD 31, is the cross. And you have 3.5 years. So this 1 week here is talking about this period of 7 years. And it says that Christ will confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So the covenant's going to be confirmed with literal Israel for 1 week. And it says in the midst of the week he shall be cut off, he was going to be crucified. And when he does, the sacrifice and the oblation shall cease. So the sacrificial service is of no longer any relevance after AD 31. Sorry? I haven't given all the information because I didn't go back into verse 25 as well. But those dates are right. I know it's 69, but there are 70 weeks. There's another week which I haven't discussed. So I'm going to erase all this. So most people are familiar with the first 2 parts of those verses. The last part of verse 27 says, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate even until the consumption. Okay, so that's quite a difficult passage. So I'm going to have to break that passage down somewhat and add some background information. So when it says, and for the overspreading, the first part of that verse is, and for the overspreading, that term, and for, means because of. Okay, so it's saying because of, and that was from the word for, the overspreading or the abundance of abominations or sin. And who are the people who are doing the sin? It's God's people who are doing sin. That's why the punishment's being brought upon them in AD 70. Christ says, your house is left unto you desolate. So, because of the abundance of sin or abominations committed by God's people, it says, he shall make it desolate. Now we know that it's these powers that are doing this work, pagan and papal Rome, that we've just discussed. But we have to remember that it's God who allows these powers to do the work on his behalf. Just as he was telling through Jeremiah to God's people, if you don't come back to me, I will punish you by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. So when it says he, the he is God. So God shall make it. So the it is the thing that he's making desolate. And we've already looked in the verse before, what does he make desolate? The thing that he makes desolate is Jerusalem. So he makes Jerusalem desolate, and he does it in two phases. He does literal and spiritual. The literal one we already looked at the second part of verse 26, AD 70, and spiritual Israel is let me pick up the last part of that phrase. It said that he shall make it desolate. So he desolates or causes Jerusalem to be desolated in AD 70, and that desolation continues past that into spiritual Israel and on into 538 and up into 1798. This desolation doesn't stop in AD 70 because pagan Rome carries on its existence right up to 538 AD, so there's actually no break between the two. It's just that after AD 70 you get into spiritual Israel. So you could put AD 70 here as well. And this desolation is committed by pagan Rome and papal, which we've already looked at. And then the rest of the verse says, he shall make it desolate even until the end, it says even until the consummation. Okay? So the thought that's here being understood is that even until the end of the consummation. Now this consummation isn't a very good translation actually, and it should really be consumption. If you go back and check the wording of that, it's really dealing with this consumption. And this consumption is this idea that God's people are going to be consumed or punished. And we've already found out that the punishment stops in 1798. We already know that information from numerous sources. So this part of the verse here is telling you that Israel is going to be punished because of their sins. And then the last part of the verse says this, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Okay? And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So, again, that's not a very good translation, so let's give some clarity to that thought. And that, when it says, and that determined, and that which has been determined, and this idea of being determined is God's already predicted it, it's already going to happen. So that which has been determined, I'm going to give you the thought, and then you'll see why the thought is correct, hopefully. And that which has been determined, and the thing that's been determined, what has God determined should happen, and that is actually the deadly wound. It's the deadly wound that should be determined, which we know occurs in 1798. This date comes up over and over again. It says this, shall be poured upon the desolate. So the deadly wound is going to be poured on, it says the desolate, but it should actually be the desolator, the one who's doing the desolating, which is papal Rome. So let's summarize then. This is papal Rome. The theme of verse 26, if you recall just a minute ago when we did it, it was punishment by God's enemies, by the enemies of God's people. That was the theme of the last part of verse 26. Yeah, you had that down. It's punishment. And the punishment comes in two phases, pagan and papal. The last part of verse 27, the theme is different, but the idea and the time frame is the same. And the theme here now is punishment by God. So God is going to punish two groups. He's going to punish Israel for the sins that they've committed. And the sins that they've committed, because of those sins that they've committed, and God brings them punishment, the punishment is through these two powers, pagan and papal, and it takes you up to 1798. The same date that we got in verse 26. Once this work has been accomplished. Remember when Babylon had accomplished its work, when Nebuchadnezzar's work had been done, what happens to Babylon? It gets destroyed and comes off the scene, and God's people are released and made free. The same idea is introduced here. God punishes first his people, and then he punishes the power that actually came against God's people. So then this punishment happens to papal Rome, and it says this: God has already determined that a deadly wound is going to be poured on the one who desolates or punishes his people, and that we know occurs in 1798. So I've just given a surface, just really going through the verses to explain what those verses mean, without giving a kind of a structural understanding of where they fit in. But if you can see that there are lots of thoughts and ideas that should be sparking in your minds about this information, and it's connecting. We know January chapter 9 is connected to chapter 8. We know that there's a controversy in the church about what the daily is, whether it's the daily sacrifice, Christ's ministration, or the daily is in paganism. Okay, but you can see here chapter 9, which is intimately connected with chapter 8, shows you that you have two powers coming against God's people, pagan Rome and papal Rome. And after papal Rome, God's going to stop the punishment, which is what we spoke about yesterday. We're dealing with the 25-20 and the restoration of God's people back again from 1798 to 1844, when we made that connection. So whoever asked that question, I hope that answered it. Okay, to raise this? Is everybody here now who's going to be here? I haven't started. This was just some Q&A because we were waiting for the people who, I guess, were in the van. I've just put my email address at the top for anybody who wants it or wants to communicate with me on any issue. Let's open with a word of prayer. We did pray before, but we're going to open with a prayer, and we're going to carry on our study in Daniel chapter 11. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your continued goodness, loving kindness and tender mercies. Lord, help each of us to have clarity of mind, and the few remaining hours that we have together, may you be with us, guide our thoughts and our feelings, and may the cares and perplexities of life be driven from our minds. Help us to realize that we are living in the time of the end, and the work of ministration in the most holy place is soon to come to an end, and many of your people are unprepared. Even many of us, Father, are not ready for that great and momentous event, and yet history is fulfilling before our very eyes and we are still asleep. Father, please help us. We know that our forefathers were woken up by the midnight cry from their sleep. We too, Lord, need waking up. Please guide our thoughts and bless us. We pray and ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. We got to verse 16 yesterday, and from verse 16 to verse 39, I'm going to go through that at a much faster pace than I have been up to now. So we're in verse 16. We'll read the verse first, and I'm just going to make general comments on these verses right up to 39, so we can have some sufficient time to get into verses 40 to 45. Verse 16 says, "But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed." In In verse 16, there is a lot of history that's covered. A lot of history. Verse 16.